For those of you who were here last year, you don't remember my introduction of Newt Fowler, but you remember his presentation on successful communities that have redefined themselves by embracing their strengths, recognizing what they are, what they're not, and what they can be. From that, they developed a realistic plan for their future. And earlier, we heard from Gary Keith. You heard him say, nurture what we're good at. That was the message we heard last year from Newt. However, I think the proposition that resonated the most with us was when he revealed that large metropolitan areas are not the current winners in the new economy. It's the small cities like Salisbury that are making great strides when their focus is appropriate, when they have a plan, and they follow that plan. Well, we were so impressed with Newt and motivated by his presentation that we invited him back to make a special presentation at the Chamber to help us brainstorm and become more focused on our future. And then we asked him back to the forum today to continue that conversation. Now, you have his bio in the program. I'm not going to read that to you. I will tell you he's an attorney with Womble Carlyle in Baltimore, focusing on business law and advisement. He's the chairman of the board of TEDCO. Now, you heard TEDCO mentioned several times. Dave Ryan talked about TEDCO. Bill Burke talked about TEDCO. TEDCO's a real player, having gone from about $20 million in available funding to, is it $105 million now, Newt? $105 million just this past year. A huge game changer for all of us in the state of Maryland. TEDCO is this quasi-public entity that provides funding and support for researchers, entrepreneurs, early startups, early stage companies to help bring new innovations to the marketplace. He's a researcher and a writer, and he's going to share his experience and insight on business and community development. Newt has a great deal of experience, and I certainly look forward to his comments. So please help me welcome back Newt Fowler.
Well, thank you all for having me back. I was never sure whether I was going to get run out of town or welcome back and embraced, so it's great to be back here. You know, this is a tough challenge. I sat through most of this morning's presentations, and it's hard to kind of craft a set of thoughts to help anchor the end of your morning economic outlook forum, having no idea, none, what you're going to hear for a couple hours beforehand. It's sort of, you don't know whether you're going to be swinging at the balls, repeating them, showing up with the wrong sport, wrong equipment. And the other challenge is I'm the only thing between you guys and lunch, right? This conference feels very different to me. Just, you know, I get snippets of coming over here, and I appreciate having a chance to spend some time with the Chamber after last year's conference. This conference feels very different to me, and I think I got lucky on a few of our slides. Last year was a lot about potential, and as Ray mentioned, it was about understanding sort of where small cities are really fitting in the macro movements that are going on right now. But I'd like to suggest that what I've sensed this morning, and hopefully you'll see a little bit in my presentation, is it's not just about potential, it's about momentum, and what do you do with it. And I think that may be a little nuanced if you live here every day, but when I get snapshots of time to time, it's been a year, I'm pretty impressed with just the tenor, the language, the types of things that have been discussed this morning. So I applaud you all on what I think is a fairly subtle but fairly profound switch. All right, so Ray touched on a lot of these, but I thought it would help just to go through a little bit of last year for those who may not have been here, but also for those that were here, just to, at a very high level, remind everyone sort of what we were talking about at this point last year. And as Ray said, urban centers are not winning in the new economy. You know, I blame the media. Media gets blamed for an awful lot, particularly during election seasons. You know, they're centered in urban areas. They write about urban areas. They see the world through urban eyes. But when you really look at the data from a number of different research institutions, it's really the small cities that are winning. Not all of them. Many struggle. And what I want to focus on this morning a little bit with everyone is less sort of the characteristics and more what that playbook looks like for small winning cities and the regions around them. It's clear they all have comprehensive collaborative, and frankly realistic, and you've heard that several times throughout the presentations this morning, realistic playbooks. So again, to touch on the fact that that urban centers are not winning, job growth, even something that was that we were sensitized to this morning that we haven't quite picked up from the Great Recession in the Lower Shore. Job growth is a key indicator in most regions, and something that you are focused on and need to be focused on very, very carefully over the next several years. And as I mentioned last year, the fastest growing areas are predominantly measured by, think about all these on your list and think about this community. Reasonably priced suburban styled homes, dependent on cars, but yet with easy commutes. Strong community associations. We've heard about churches in the medical community context and their initiatives. Great schools. And I can't say that enough because I know it's a challenge for everyone in Maryland right now. Great schools. And that's K-12 as much as it is the upper. And access to natural amenities, which clearly we have in the Lower Shore in spades. Does this sound like where you all live? Begin to sound like it? Begin to have the potential of it? So the things to worry about, I'm going to show you a couple of slides, and again, this is sort of a refresher for those that were here last year. The things you need to worry about, and what becomes a spiral that is very hard to escape, are what plague many unsuccessful and struggling small communities. It's high unemployment, it's declining and aging population base, and I want to put a footnote by the aging because I'm not talking about folks that come to retire on the shore. We're going to touch on that in a second. High poverty rates and lower medium income. And when you look at sort of the macro side of these small struggling communities, and again, I'm talking about small cities and the regions that surround them, they're faced with outdated infrastructure, physical infrastructure, and a dependence on traditional industry. And we're going to touch on this in a few minutes as well. We talked about it last year. You heard a lot about this morning. We're not talking about the evolution and expansion of traditional industry. We're truly talking about the inability to find a new path or a new way. And the challenge of retaining human capital. And it was interesting hearing the comments about Warwick's graduates and just that general note that they are more likely to either be from here or stay here. And I know that's a discussion I've had with some folks in the room, with the great students we have that come to Salisbury, for example. You're not alone. One of the greatest export industries in Baltimore City is the 6,000 plus undergraduates that are the net departers after 4 years in the region. We don't do a good job of keeping them in our community. It's a challenge for everybody that has these great institutions. You attract folks here, and you've got to have a real environment that makes them want to stay. Declining competitiveness on a regional basis, weakened civic infrastructure, and again, things can change dramatically over a year, and I'm going to foreshadow another thought I have in a minute, but I come from a city where there is a level of receptiveness by the administration and our city council to economic development issues, to the emerging new economy opportunities, to a lot of the ecosystems we have there in cyber and healthcare. But at best, it's lip service. And I suspect that might be changing here in profound ways. And last, sort of limited access to resources. And you've heard about capital being one of the ones for early stage companies. But these struggling communities, these are the things that they face. And I give you both of these lists, not because I'm worried about the Lower Shore in this context, but frankly, these are the things you need to keep an eye on, making sure that they are not sort of becoming an element of the story or the trend. So last year, I went through sort of a number of different successful cities, small cities, showed you a little bit about what was making each of them successful. I went back and tried to figure out whether there was a set of themes that I could draw from it. And what I would suggest you think about, and particularly in terms of the next year for the Lower Shore, is think about it in terms of culture, which I know is kind of a squishy word, but when you actually look at the tactical things that are going on and understand what that means for your broader community, I think you'll realize that we really are talking about a change in culture and a reinforcing of a certain set of cultures. So I picked two of them in particular that synthesize for me what I think winning small cities, winning small communities, just like the Lower Shore, just like Salisbury, are doing. So when you first look at the culture of innovation, it's a willingness to experiment, and you heard that all morning long. Experiment in everything from the business plan competitions, ways to engage entrepreneurs. You heard it in terms of efforts to change the agricultural environment. You clearly heard about it with your medical community on the Lower Shore. It is a willingness, not a resignation to experience, but a willingness to experiment. And it may have been Einstein that said this. How many people think every experiment is a successful experiment, right? You're going to have issues. You're going to have failures. You're going to have things that don't work out. The cultural aspect of experimentation is you just keep experimenting. You don't stop. You reinvent old industries. Reinvention can be everything from, as I've learned very recently, LED systems that make our chicken coops more productive in terms of accelerating chicken growth that's playing out right now on the Lower Shore. Reinventing in terms of tackling this difficult phosphorus issue in challenging ways. It is realizing that what worked yesterday, whether it's in the welding universe, 3D manufacturing, it doesn't matter. How do you reinvent? How do you stay competitive? And that's just not on the shoulders of the particular business or industry. It's on the shoulders of the broader community to be willing to understand that we have to do training for these folks. We have to be experimenting. We have to allow them to have resources to be able to rethink their industries. And it's embracing new industries and new ideas. And this is really tricky. The winning cities that I went through last year, and I went back and sort of thought about it again some more, the winning cities aren't coming up with something out of the blue that has no connection to their community. You have a great pharma manufacturing and scaling cluster here in this region. Does that necessarily mean that you can be the leading biotech innovation cluster as well? Maybe not. But you've got something pretty phenomenal to build on in terms of what's going on at Cadista and your other pharma companies. So it's really understanding which new industries might make the most sense. We talked a little bit about the drone sector last year. That's going to really be an explosive growth area. You are uniquely positioned on the Lower Shore to take advantage of some interesting research that's going to play out sort of literally across the bay. And the last piece, and it's been touched on a number of times, was frankly touched on in terms of recruiting well-educated, well-compensated talent. It is having a culture that's expanding the dynamism of your community. Different restaurants, different music venues, different looking people. The more you can embrace changing the fabric of your community, the more exciting and more engaging, more attractive you are in terms of recruiting talent and keeping it here. So I put those all under the umbrella of the culture of innovation. The other culture, and I think there are sea changes afoot in the Lower Shore to the better, is the culture of collaboration. I really want to make sure that my sense of what collaboration means, you at least leave with an understanding. Collaboration doesn't mean I've got to agree with everybody. Collaboration means that there's just really a culture where the key legs of the community, the business, the academic environment, the government, sort of really work together to sort of advance regional economic development initiatives. We're not always going to agree on what those are. We're not always necessarily going to be able to champion each other's things wholeheartely, but recognizing that collaborative spirit needs to be there, it's just absolutely critical for a community. What I would suggest, though, is that you celebrate each other's successes. I mean, what's going on at Salisbury is phenomenal, but there's also great things going on at Warwick and other communities. The key is to recognize that this isn't fighting over a pie that's 12 inches. It's the holiday time, so it's pumpkin slices at my house. It's not fighting over a pie that's 12. It's figuring out how to get it to 14, to 16, to 18. because your slice doesn't matter if the pie keeps growing, because you're all succeeding in that. I've spent 30 years of my career in Baltimore, and I watched the tech sector. It's where I spend most of my professional life. I watched the tech sector evolve from waking up and going, oh my God, we have a tech sector, predominantly out of the gaming community up in Hunt Valley. Then it went from, that's mine, and there was lots of competition over taking credit for an entrepreneur, as we've heard a little bit this morning, a lot over sort of which organization was the umbrella organization for tech. It's gone to a phase now where we don't even have a Greater Baltimore Tech Council anymore. I used to chair it a couple of years ago. It doesn't exist. Does not exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is we've gone sort of past the need for that sort of command control structure. We have a lot of very competitive but very collaborative organizations sort of driving our new economy in a Greater Baltimore. So I put all that under that rubric of the culture of collaboration. Culture of innovation, culture of collaboration. So what other common themes come out of communities that I view as being very successful, small businesses, small regions that are growing? And we're talking about growing jobs and growing median income. They're all very realistic in their goals. They compete for new industries that build on the region's strengths. They don't go out and compete for things where they don't have an edge. They align that growth around those traditional industries and assets, of which you have many here in this region. And they don't do the Me Too. And the Me Too is the most dangerous thing I see many, many communities doing. I mean, we can all go back through it. You know, at the turn of the century, literally, it was all the security software around what happens when the millennial switches over. Does every computer system going to crash? It went from 3D manufacturing being one of the most recent, cyber, nanotechnology. I mean, we've all heard these buzzes. It's like the color of the year from Pantene. It depends on, each year there's going to be another hot new thing. You need to be aware of them, but the filter you need to be always running is, does it fit into what we have here on the lower share? Does it fit into the assets that we can really build on? And the one area that I think you really have a phenomenal leg up on is you lead with lifestyle. It's a place to start a career, raise a family, build a life, and have fun. When you read a lot of the research that's going on in what's happening with these millennials. How many millennials are here? Can you raise your hand if you're a millennial? You're not going to do it, are you? The irony of being a millennial is there's a lot of experimentation early in their life, but you know what happens when they start having families and kids? It's a shocker. They end up moving into suburban environments. They end up moving into communities with great schools. So all this stuff that everybody hears about in terms of living, down in urban centers is very, very true at an early stage in their career. But the research is showing a pattern once they sort of, get into the family and focused career mode of where they shift into other communities and they're moving into them. The Great Plains area is making hay out of this nonstop because they have a phenomenal school system. And most of you know you can work in the new economy anywhere. And so a lot of folks are growing businesses in the Midwest because the talent has shown up there to build their lives. So what's happened over the last year? I spent a little bit of time, and the best part about the next couple of slides is I have them absolutely wrong. I missed I didn't miss everything from this morning. I missed a lot from this morning. So the fact that people will say, well, you didn't put this up there, or you forgot about that, is great, because it proves my point that a lot has gone on since I was here last year with you all. And I wanted to take snippets of it. I tried to structure it a little bit around some of the larger themes I just mentioned. First of all, there's been a lot of alignment in growth around your traditional industries. We heard a lot about the pharma, the generics manufacturing operation Cadista has. Well, that expansion is great news for you. That is just great news for you, because it will also, as I guess it was Dave said, it also is going to put you on the radar with other pharmaceutical manufacturing operations. Clusters happen for a reason. I think Poly One's second shift, hopefully, is a phenomenal message to the community that we're getting busy and we're picking up steam. I think the Archon Welding Training Center with Warwick is orienting, as you saw one of the slides we saw earlier, talked about sort of where the jobs are and where we need to be filling them. Answering that call with meaningful programs that are getting those certifications is absolutely critical. And I think what we hear all the time, every time I'm down here, is that you have three great academic institutions that are really invested in the economic development initiatives in this community. They're really anchors to what's going on year in and year out. And I know I missed a few of those themes, so I'm actually glad I missed them, because again, it just shows how much is really happening down here. So themes of where you played to the region's strengths. And I know this sounds kind of weird, but I like probably many people, when I heard about sort of the legislation to give the licenses out for medical cannabis, I felt, well, it's going to be the granola sorts or the hippies or, whatever. The money in Baltimore behind the licenses that they're being pursued for that sort of 5-6 jurisdiction area, they're the people that own the casinos. They're the people that own the largest real estate operations in town. They are the people that own some of the largest public companies. I'm not going to name the names, but the point I'm making is it is big money. If you all can manage to get a strong toehold in that industry over here on the lower shore, it's going to do two phenomenal things for you. First of all, it's going to be very successful and bring immense amount of tax revenue in. And secondly, it is a foothold for some innovative changes that are going to happen in the agricultural sector. There's going to be an ability to do wet hops. There's going to be an ability to do a lot of other categories of plants that are high margin, in demand, and locally needed. So it's an interesting cornerstone, and I think the sooner a community figures out that medical cannabis is not this thing we just got to endure and take the tax money from, but that it actually can help us reinvent in very interesting ways the science of how we farm, I think you can have an amazing leg up on some very high margin, high value products well beyond that regulated industry. Another one sort of down the stream is this consortium that you formed for wind energy. It's coming, as everybody knows. It is of huge potential for the lower shore to really put an anchor in terms of economic development. Fabrication, assembly, these are massive systems, and to the extent that you get the winning leg on those assemblies, I think that it will bode well for you. When you look at the engineering, the robotics, the technologies that are going to go into designing and ultimately installing those wind cells, the reality is those applications will have a lot of other offshoots in a lot of other industries. It's a way to really bring a new sort of set of engineering and manufacturing skills into the region. We heard about the airport earlier. Getting that restructuring and plan in place and really figuring out how that airport can manage to help with all of these industry activities that are happening is it's a phenomenal asset. Not every small city has an airport like you all have. And I got to meet Jake a minute ago, and I saw Bob in the hall. I think one of the most profound shifts that I've sensed is you now have, and I got to tell you, I just wish I had this in Baltimore for all that we do. I think you have a new collaborative chapter. I know you have a new collaborative chapter with your county and your city government. Having people willing to show up at these conferences, it's funny. We had over 1,000 people show up at the annual technology celebration in Baltimore, and guess who was missing? The mayor. That tells you everything you need to know about the commitment to the region's economy and to its business community. So I applaud you, and I would embrace it. I think it's an opportunity that would be missed if you don't continue those dialogues and discussions and really build those relationships. All right, playbook continuing. So talking about cultural and collaborative innovation for a second. Somebody said how important it was for Salisbury to continue to be redeveloped. I got to tell you, I take a peek at Salisbury coming down every once in a while, and I'm amazed at how much is going on down there. But the development rights for innovative uses of sites is it's exciting. The gallery building being donated to Salisbury, a portion of which are going to be used with young entrepreneurs, is a great investment to make. And frankly, and Bill, I'm going to screw it up because you had a long list, but the Chamber's K-12 initiative, yay. Getting young citizens, young taxpayers to understand they've got a future here, to be engaged and excited about what it means to be an entrepreneur, is phenomenal. And understanding the continuum of that all the way through Gull Cage, we heard about Shore Hatchery. I talked a little bit about it last year. Those are phenomenal assets that even if people aren't participating in them, don't lose sight of the fact that they have a powerful impact on the fact they are here and that they are vibrant and that they are growing. So what about next year? Well, some of the themes I have heard in preparing to talk to you guys a little bit this morning was talking more about tax reduction. I know the county has done it, and I know there's a conversation in the city about it. So you heard a lot about the convention center. Getting that alcohol license is not just a revenue generator. It will change the mix of the type of businesses, trade associations. It's not just concerts with people causing havoc. It's getting the business community, getting trade associations, keeping you guys, you heard so much about this earlier, keeping you guys competitive in terms of what's going on in the tourism universe. And I mentioned a minute ago about sort of aging as a bad thing. One resource that you have, and it's true both on the upper and lower shore, that you absolutely need a focused strategy on sooner rather than later, is what I've heard is called gray shore. You have more mentors, more seasoned entrepreneurs, more folks that have done more things wrong that could keep others from doing them, wrong in your community. There's only so much fishing and crabbing and gardening you can do. And so find the group that's itchy. And this isn't simply just, the score. I'm talking about seasoned entrepreneurs that could truly roll their sleeves up and make a difference in helping companies reinvent themselves, supporting some of the entrepreneurial activities at our universities and systems down here. It's just, I can't overemphasize that is a hidden resource for you. And the irony is the more you get them engaged, the less they're going to fuss about the taxes. It really is that simple, I hate to say. All right, so what are my thoughts sort of working toward wrapping up this morning? And again, thank you very much for having me come back. You guys have had some low-hanging fruit. You've had some stuff that was pretty easy to pull off. It looked hard when you were doing it. The challenge with sustaining a culture of innovation is continuing to be willing to experiment, to try new ideas, to embrace stuff that others are doing. Maybe it's in competition. There's a clause called co-optition. Work a little bit together, compete, but know that what you're doing is rising, boats for all. Really continuing to embrace new industries, thinking very creatively, not about some of the challenges you have in terms of phosphorus and the agricultural community, but that wind and drone markets are there for the taking, frankly. Rethink old ones. I think it's amazing what's happened in the pharmaceutical sort of manufacturing component here, but so much can also happen with 3D manufacturing, welding, tech manufacturing as well, to bring that industry back into the fore over here. And I keep saying it, and I look at this community and I look at the faces out here. You have got to continue to expand your cultural dynamism. You have to continue to embrace all the communities that are in the lower shore. This is a fabric. It's not just one thread or two threads or three threads of people, of interests, of passions. It is all threads that make it so exciting. And by the way, it's a challenge we have in the technology sector in spades. Many people have probably followed the challenges of the Silicon Valley, both in terms of minority and diversity recruitment and women. And I can say that looking at entrepreneurs in the Baltimore community, it is something that we at TEDCO, where's Ray? You're out there somewhere. We at TEDCO understand that is a massive challenge for us. We were given a great legacy by the state to run all the venture funds. We need to make sure those venture funds are available for every entrepreneur, not just ones that look the same as the guys that pitched just a minute ago. Enough on that. Collaborate, compromise, and champion. I've already talked about what I mean by collaboration. You've got to work very hard to keep the business, the academy, and government collaborating. You've got to find common ground, even if you don't necessarily agree on what in each of those initiatives might be. The one thing that we did early when Penny Lewandowski was brought in to run the Tech Council for Greater Baltimore, the one thing we did early, and I give her all the credit for this, is we didn't stop celebrating successes. And you heard Bill do that with the laundry list of things that happened at Salisbury. And hats off. For you guys, the bus, for those that don't know, the bus is a big deal. Every community tries to outdo every other community when that tech bus rolls into town. For you to have as many people on it as all three academic institutions in Baltimore says an awful lot. There's a lot of momentum here that you need to be very proud of. But celebrating successes, championing them, highlighting them, making sure that everybody is aware of them, no matter what industry sector it is absolutely critical to changing that sort of and keeping that sort of culture of collaboration and of sort of championing going on. You got to be realistic. I mentioned that a minute ago. Building on early successes is hard work. Every year is going to be a tough year. It always is going to be a tough year, but you've got to keep building on it. And frankly, with your new leadership down here in the county and in the city, and frankly with your delegations for Annapolis, continue to embrace them, continue to engage them in these discussions. It is important that the business community in reality drives a great deal of what we've talked about this morning, but the reality is you have to have all of those folks engaged, and my sense is they are. I mean, it's just a super new chapter for you on the Lower Shore. Look for opportunities to grow beyond traditional industries. Look at the research. Your economic development folks are keeping an eye on what's going on. Understand and try out what might be there that someone else is sort of thinking about that might fit in well with you all. I've already told you before, avoid the Me Tooing. It's such a temptation to say, we're going to be nano, or whatever it's going to be in 2016. No, you're not. But you can be a lot of things that are very, very close to the core assets that you have here. Last but not least, before we have a few minutes to answer questions, you've got to make sure that what you're marketing is here. You've got to make sure it's very realistic. You have a great story to tell on the Lower Shore, but the message has to match it, because with social media and millennial behaviors the way they are, if it doesn't match up, people know it in real time. So make sure the messaging matches what we really have going on down here. It's funny. I mean, the Panama Jack comment from earlier. It's everybody's got a plan until you get hit in the face. This whole conversation from this morning and my thoughts really are not really about having a plan. What someone said once to me, it's not the plan that matters, and this is true in every single startup I've ever worked with. The plan doesn't matter. You know what matters? Planning, practicing, talking, collaborating, thinking. Because I guarantee you, whatever everybody thinks is going to happen next year, it's not going to happen. But the planning for that process, it's that exercise of planning. It's the discipline of understanding what do we have, what don't we have, where can we move, what advantages are out there, and the ability to adapt. It's that planning process that, I hate to give Mike Tyson any credit for this whatsoever, but it's that planning process that allowed him to win. The plan not to get hit in the mouth, we're all going to get hit in the mouth. But the reality is it's that planning process that allows you to take it, shake it off, and say, you know what? I don't like what just happened. I don't like where we ended up on that issue, but we're going to try it again. We're going to try something else again. It's that planning process. And I'm telling you, name me a startup in Baltimore. Name me a startup. Do you know a silkscreen company that came out of the University of Maryland? Silkscreen. Silk Screen Company came out of the University of Maryland. Under Armour. Silkscreen Company. There was a crazy little company called ad.com, advertising.com, that almost went out of business. How many times? It was your tour duty ended. Once or twice they were almost out of business. And, got sold off for $1 billion to AOL. Millennial Media has spun off. One could argue whether they were successful or not, given market cap and value. Aether, Millennial Media. You can list off the number of crash and burn large companies, but you know what each of them did? They seeded a different industry. So the more you embrace, the planning process, the more you realize that you could have so many things come out of challenging situations if you're willing to work together as a community. And let me say, and again, I want to open up for questions, I feel very differently about what I heard this morning from what I heard last year. We're not talking about potential, we're talking about momentum. But momentum is habits, it's planning, and it's being truly willing as a community to continue to talk and work together. Thank you guys for having me down again this morning. I cut down my slides by 30 from last time, and I still managed to eat up almost all my time. Ray, what would you like me to do? Take a couple of questions and then... Yes? All right. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
There's been a lot of issues around the Affordable Care Act and whether it's good or bad, but I'm curious about your take on what that has done for the opportunities for entrepreneurs to step out on their own and not have to stay with big companies to keep their health care.
Yeah, I really can't speak to that in a meaningful way. Is Peggy still here? She's still here?
I just mean that they don't need that crutch of a large company to have health care.
No, but there's a sea change. There's really a lot of uncertainty. The way I understand, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to sort of it's the gig economy. For those of you who don't understand, there's a massive shift to independent contracting, but there's also backlash. If you know, Seattle's now trying to unionize the Uber drivers. I think it's just chaos. I don't think that young folks focus on healthcare as a driver to how they're getting paid and what they want to do. I think they do when they have a kid, but I don't think they do as young professionals. And so I don't see that as a driver for younger folks, but I think there's an immense amount of uncertainty in it. I'll tell you the one thing that is fascinating that's going on with Peninsula Regional that is true in Baltimore, but you have a unified way of dealing with it over here. The shift to truly managing wellness is a dramatic shift. I think from a service industry perspective, the hospital can't do it all. They're going to need a lot of folks to collaborate with. I think there's a lot of opportunities for folks in the healthcare service industry to be thinking about how do I help manage wellness and how do I help keep folks from being readmitted. So it's a sector that, because you don't have competing systems, you have a very healthy, unified system over in the Lower Shore. I think it's a factor that really is something that would allow for some experimentation and collaboration with the system. So I'll give you another take on it. Yes, ma'am.
I have a follow-up question to that. Do you have any suggestions to balance the innovation and new technology and opportunity with, again, the overwhelming shortage of frontline healthcare workers? Because people are not just, running to get into be a healthcare worker or nurses or other specialties that we have such a shortage of.
Well, yes, and the challenge, everyone has a shortage of them. I mean, the reality is when you get to employment numbers the way we have, I mean, we don't pay enough for somebody to do some of those jobs, but that's market driven. I mean, it's, you can see it. I hate to say it, you see it in education too. I mean, when you think about the most important investment we can be making is in the minds of our kids. Does the money match that? So in Baltimore, it's a mess. I mean, there are people in those jobs, but the reality is there's, if I can go a notch up and be in a lab technician as opposed to sort of in the pure service side of it, I'm going to do that. I don't know what the answer to that is. It's a tough question everywhere. It's not just the Lower Shore. Yes, sir.
Talked a lot about community and collaboration.
These lights are bright, by the way. So
And so I was wondering if Baltimore has something like this where it's maybe on a quarterly basis or a semi-annual basis, like a leadership council that brings all the parties together to talk about planning, like you said, is really, really important in building on the momentum that's here.
Ernie? It's a problem with these lights. I can't find. Gee, is that something the chamber could help with?
Sounds familiar.
Does it? I think, all kidding aside, having a leadership group, having quarterly happy hours. I mean, I hate to say, thank you. I hate to say it. I think that a social element to where you begin to build those relationships and have those conversations. Frankly, you have phenomenal talent that I've seen it in every panel the past 2 years. Having somebody speak for 15 minutes on an issue and then having a networking event and talking about what's on people's minds. Ernie's going to invite me down to it, right? I think that's something the chamber could really do. I frankly think the schools could do it as well. But somebody's got to take sort of the facilitating role. It's not about solving the problem. It's about getting, an environment and habit forming, getting people to show up. You got to have it be fun. I mean, you've been great today, but I realize that the energy sitting here listening to me versus the energy outside talking with each other during the break is night and day. So fostering that type of environment, Ernie, is critical. One more. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a chicken farmer's daughter. My father also had a manufacturing plant in Salisbury, so I have a dual role here. Our farm was less than a mile from here. Back when I lived out here, you couldn't get anybody coming to Boston Switch Road. To think that there'd be a college here, all this facility, it's really amazing in the past 40 years. But what I want to talk about is, and challenge people about this manure problem that could be a new industry. I know back when we were raising chickens, it was a problem then. This isn't a new problem. And now what's going on is, we've got these chicken, it's no longer the time where you could have a family farm with 2-3 chicken houses and pay for the chicken houses.
Let me use that as an example, because I said this last year to you all, and you can never tell when something goes over like a lead balloon. Anybody heard of pigs in Iowa? Well, let me tell you the Iowa story. In Iowa, they have a mess, literally, on their hands. And what one of the universities did was say, let's start having plan and technology competitions to figure out how to do cogeneration and some other things. And it is one of the leading clusters now for innovative technologies in terms of waste management for agriculture. So I did say it, I think I did say it last year, didn't I? I think I said last year to you that the phosphorus isn't going away. The battle over the health of the bay is not going away, as challenging and as emotional it is. And let me say, and you may not remember this, I'm a grandson of an oysterman. So I'm from over here in some part of my body. I don't know where it is right now. Looking at problems as opportunities and looking at that phosphorus challenge and figuring out, can we go get some grant dollars, because they're out there, to build some models to figure out how to bring industry here to help us solve this issue. It's worth exploring, because the challenge is not going to go away. I want to thank you guys again very much for having me join you down here this morning. Thank you.
Okay, we won't belabor the point. It's almost time to eat. But Ray, thank you very much. I was going to ask how you get this guy down here to speak so often, but he just told us. It's in his DNA. He's the grandson of an oysterman. So very well done. Newt, thank you for your travels down here again. We appreciate it. Indulge me for 60 seconds. I'd like to thank again our sponsors. Warwick Community College, Delmarva Toyota Dealers, Comcast, M&T Bank, Comcast Spotlight, AH Pharma, Beacon and SU, Marie Calafura, MBA CPA, Brad Gillis, Sperry Van Ness Commercial Real Estate, APPI Energy, Maryland Capital Enterprise, Avery Hall Insurance, BBSI, ICAT Logistics Incorporated, Lower Shore Enterprises, Toroid Corporation, Salisbury University, Delmarva Veteran Builders, PKS and Company, Prime Lending, University of Maryland Eastern Shore, Tri-County Council, and Whiting Turner. Join me in thanking these guys once again.